Welcome to Slow Night, Ancient Tales. Tonight, we invite you to journey into the intricate maze of human emotions with a classic Korean short story, The Antenna of the Heart by Lee Hyo-seok. This story follows a young woman's impulsive midnight escape to a seaside inn, pulling along a man who finds himself caught between conscience and undeniable temptation. As they stand by the dark, whispering ocean, the narrative delicately explores the unpredictable, multifaceted nature of the human heart and the secrets we keep even from ourselves. So let go of the day's worries, rest your head, and let the gentle sounds of the night sea guide you into a peaceful slumber. Let's begin. Juria author Lee Hyo-seok, The Antenna of the Heart. Who on earth is that guy? Feeling the gaze of an unknown man on her back, Juria looked behind her once more as she entered the Jongdong alley. Seeing the man still following her from a certain distance, she frowned. She considered changing direction and taking a different route, but due to the nature of the task she was entrusted with, she had no choice but to proceed straight into the Jongdong alley. Is he a delinquent or perhaps a detective? He was an unidentifiable character. Having started trailing her from around Jongno, he cautiously shadowed her past the front of the M department store and through a narrow alleyway. Judging by his neat suit, he was either some sort of detective or a common delinquent. However, to her, who believed she had no reason to be chased by a detective, the pursuit of this mysterious man gave an even more unsettling feeling. You rascal, just try and follow me. Walking close under the eaves of the houses, when she reached a small sweet shop, she looked back, cleverly evaded the man's eyes, and darted inside the shop. As she bought some chewing gum and looked outside while chewing it vigorously, the man, having lost his lead, peered around the sides of the street and brushed past the front of the sweet shop. Hideous guy. Juria snorted and, looking at the shop owner, said, "As if a guy like that could tail me." Hearing the owner's laughter, she left the shop, checked where the man had gone, and quietly slipped into the back alley. Even when she passed the consulate area and emerged onto a wide hill, the man's shadow was nowhere to be seen. Relieved, Juria let out a triumphant laugh, yet still casting a meticulously cautious eye, and hurried down toward the apartment that was Minho's lodging. A two-story wooden house standing isolated halfway up the hill, it might be inappropriate to call that single building, with various organization signboards hung at its entrance, an apartment. However, since it rented out rooms to individuals or groups, Juria felt no unnaturalness in calling the house an apartment. Minho was renting a room on the second floor. Juria, who hurriedly entered the doorway, ran up to the second floor and easily found Minho's room, even though it was her first time there. When she knocked on the unlocked door, it was gladly opened from the inside. Namhee's head, which had peeked out, suddenly shrank back. For a moment, Juria's eyebrows furrowed at the unexpected appearance of this heroine, but she calmly walked inside. Minho was not there. Namhee was alone. The book Namhee had been reading out of boredom lay open on the bed. Namhee, who had been absent-mindedly rolling around, felt awkward and her body stiffened because of this sudden intruder whom she didn't get along with, as if she were standing before a strict teacher. "I came to see Mr. Minho, but it seems he isn't here. I've been waiting all this time, but he hasn't come back. I wonder what's going on. It's past the time." Saying this, Juria stepped closer to the desk. Namhee suddenly dashed in front of her, snatched a piece of paper lying on the desk, and swiftly crumpled it up. The young woman's face flushed and glowed visibly. Assuming it was inevitably some playful doodles of her fantasies about Minho, Juria threw a bitter smile squarely at Namhee's face. Hidden within the shadow of that smile, however, was a sharp glare like that of a viper. To Juria, Namhee, who appeared and intercepted her wherever she went, was a bothersome and awkward existence, while to Namhee, Juria seemed like an eagle harboring venom. Every time they met, one simultaneously felt anxious fear and the other fiery jealousy. It wasn't that Juria's cold reason didn't scold this unseemly jealousy of hers, but her feminine instincts spurred on an excessive passion all the more. "Should I be going, then?" Feeling embarrassed, said and ashamed, blushing, Namhee muttered to herself and left the apartment without waiting for Juria's response. Remaining alone in the ownerless room after Namhee had left, Juria actually felt a bit awkward. Her own audacity in taking away someone else's right and stepping into their place felt incredibly brazen to her. But this thought, too, vanished like the scent of the gum she was chewing, leaving only sticky thoughts of Minho in her mind. She herself found it bizarre that an unjustified sense of competition and an unknown feeling of rivalry occupied her heart, even as she thought about it. Outside the window, a girls' school could be seen down below. The pure figures of the girls playing and bouncing like balls in the playground, devoid of any scheming, whipped heavily at her conscience. Still, she naturally feigned ignorance and became the queen of the masterless room. Unable to bear the boredom of the time Minho was absent, she lit the alcohol stove and boiled water. As if it were her own apartment where she had lived for years, she easily took cream and sugar out of the cupboard and made coffee. While she was blowing on the hot tea, Minho arrived. I acted as the master of this room for a little while. Juria stood up from the chair, offering the seat to the owner, and added, and even chased Namhee away. Saying this, she stared intently at his face to observe the effect this one sentence had on Minho. Impressive. Instead of a sad expression, Minho praised this pretty hero with a smile. Of course, there was no way of knowing whether that smile and praise were genuine or false, but Juria's thought that she had at least grasped the heart of this man left over after his thoughts, situation, conscience, and pure heart were removed, did not seem to be merely her vain conceit. You know Juwa went to the countryside for organization work, right? I heard it from a comrade. I came at Juwa's request. Saying this, Juria pulled out a thick envelope from her handbag. He asked me to deliver this immediately. Haha, so it's come around like this. Minho nodded and kept the envelope deep inside his desk. Juria herself actually did not know the contents of the envelope. She didn't particularly try to find out, and simply felt relieved upon completing her mission to deliver the message. And, looking at Minho with playful eyes, she said, "He asked you to open it immediately and start right away. If it's English, it'll be quick, but if it's German, it'll be a bit tricky." Here, Juria immediately realized that it was a translation job of an original pamphlet directly related to their work, imported straight from the heart of Europe, as was always the case. But considering her position, she did not try to ask for the secrets of its detailed contents. Since I've finished the task I was entrusted with, I should be going. She took out a new piece of gum, put it in her mouth, and gracefully stood up. Leaving the apartment and walking down the hill, Juria heard the sound of footsteps on the quiet street and looked back again. The unknown man from earlier was following her again. Suddenly, she got goosebumps. What a bug-like creep. Bursting with anger at the persistent man's behavior, Juria suddenly came up with a trick. She stopped her steps and stood abruptly by the side of the road. Let's see the guy pass ahead. The man trudged closer and then stopped beside her. Just as she spun around, thinking of spitting her chewed gum right in his face, the man wore an inscrutable smile on his face and politely bowed his head. "Excuse me, but are you Miss Kim Young-ae? What's it to you? I have something to tell you." The man pushed his hat up so it rested on the nape of his neck, thrust both hands deep into his suit pants pockets, and said, "How about you go down to the countryside instead of pointlessly wandering the streets of Seoul with nothing to do?" It wasn't that the sudden advice didn't give her a jolt, but she suppressed the urge to just spit her gum in his rude face, and said, "Well, who are you to be so presumptuous?" Of course, she could guess from his advice that he wasn't a frivolous delinquent, but "I'm not anyone particularly great, but I say this because your situation is pitiful. It's an action of my own free will, so what's so pitiful about it? Think of how much they must be waiting for you in the countryside." Her hometown, which she had forgotten for a long time, suddenly came to mind. But more than that, it was so bizarre that he knew her personal circumstances to this extent and spoke of them, so Juria asked, "Just what on earth are you, to say such things?" "When you return home this evening, you will find out what I am." Saying this, the man took his hands out of his pockets, put on a serious expression, and added, "Anyway, think carefully and don't ruin your future path." Tossing this last remark, he he took the lead this time and strode down the street. Juria, perplexed and dumbfounded, stood blankly in that spot for a long while, forgetting even to chew her gum, watching the back of the strange man. That man's words cut unusually deep to the bone, stirring up various thoughts in her chest. Clinging to her wavering, anxious heart, Juria wandered aimlessly through the streets. Thinking it would be bleak to return to her lonely lodging and cook dinner alone, she finished a simple dinner at a Western-style restaurant and only slowly made her way back home after the street lamps lit up. Discovering 2 pairs of shoes placed below the wooden porch, Juria, inevitably assuming Juwa's comrades had come to visit, ran into the room but was startled to find they were unexpected figures she couldn't have imagined. It was a scene where, if only she could, she wanted to avoid the young man before her, turn back, and run away. "Where have you been roaming around all day?" The calm voice grabbed and shook the mind of Juria, who was standing there absent-mindedly. The young man sitting next to him looked at the blankly standing Juria with a slightly disdainful gaze. Thinking, since it has come to this, Juria steeled her heart and flopped down in her spot. "When did you come up to Seoul, brother?" At the sight of his younger sister with her head bowed, the brother softened his voice. "It has already been several days since I came to Seoul, but how could I find your house?" "Then how did you find it?" "What else could I do? I asked a private detective and barely found it after 3 days." "A detective?" Asking back like this, Juria finally realized the identity of the strange man on the street from earlier. She was also able to realize that his persistent tailing was ultimately a professional intention to observe her movements rather than a desire to give her helpful advice. "Do you really have to cause the family so much worry?" "It's an action I took after thinking enough about it. So why is there a need for you to worry?" "Do you know how much our only mother worries every single day? You terribly unfilial child." "I already considered the extreme unfilial piety anyway. Even if it means rebelling against mother, I cannot betray the freedom of my heart." "Stop your presumptuous talk." The brother grew agitated and raised his voice. "What have you even done since coming to Seoul during this time? Hooking up with a penniless loafer, what have you achieved?" Hearing these words, Juria couldn't stay quiet with her proud self-esteem. "Don't speak so carelessly. A penniless loafer? How can you say that? Even if he has no money, his intentions are different from those of a wealthy pig." The man sitting next to him, the fiancé from the countryside whom Juria had betrayed and left, perhaps finding it bitter, cast sidelong glances equally at the brother and Juria. "Think carefully and change your mind." At this single remark from her brother, however, Juria did not bother to rebel. Rather, making it seem as though it pained her, she silently bowed her head. The fiancé, who had been sitting like a scarecrow, seemed to seize the opportunity, looked at the brother, then at Juria, and opened his mouth. "I cannot wait forever, so please give me a definite answer this time. Even now it is never too late for me, so think it through and handle it well." Dumbfounded, Juria chuckled inwardly. "It hasn't been long since I already gave a definite answer. I never even told him to wait. What a clingy man." Thinking this and laughing inwardly, she nonetheless maintained a silently gloomy and sorrowful attitude on the outside. "Without further ado, let's absolutely go down tomorrow. You're getting older, so how long will you stay in this state, and when will you become a proper person?" Feeling favorably toward her relatively gentle brother's attitude, Juria realized that no matter what her brother said, it was advantageous to pretend to listen politely and stay quiet. "Face regarding the family is one thing, but now I have no face to face, Mr. Park." The brother looked at the fiancé as if apologizing. Suddenly, thick tears welled up and fell from Juria's eyes. The 2 young men secretly rejoiced that their persuasion had taken effect, but Juria was smiling on the inside. Tears, they are not necessarily just an expression of sadness. For the present Juria, those tears were a kind of technique, a kind of means. Quite contrary to her tears, she was naturally scheming a different trick in her mind. "If I stay up the night together here with them, I will inevitably end up caught. Before the night ends, I must escape the clutches of these 2 wolves." Late that night, slipping past the 2 who had fallen asleep early, Juria left the room pretending to go out on an errand. She went into the opposite room, quickly changed her clothes, packed enough belongings into a bag for a simple trip, and secretly left the house. She smashed the mute piggy bank she had brought out against a stone and scooped the scattered money into her bag. This should be enough travel money to go to Wolmedo, watch the sea, and hide out for a few days. Carrying the cumbersome bag, she walked quickly out through the back alley. But will he agree to accompany me? Afraid that going alone might look suspicious, she planned to have Minho accompany her. She secretly thought this was a perfectly tailored, good opportunity to claim Minho. If he won't go, I'll drag him. Making the resolve of a beautiful devil, Juria walked through the quiet night streets and headed toward the Jongdong apartment. Grabbing and pulling up Minho, who had already turned off the lights and was lying in bed, Juria informed him of the danger to his safety in a hasty tone. Of course, it was a kind of technique of hers, but because her tone was so urgent and her attitude so stark, Minho also hurriedly jumped up and fumbled to change his clothes. Just as if he had heard a shout of "Fire!" and dashed out in an instant, Minho frantically rushed about in a state of agitation, lacking any awareness for a moment. With her stamping her feet and rushing him by his side, he finally grabbed his hat and put it on without assessing the context or exercising cool judgment, and practically dragged by Juria's hand, stumbled out into the street in a flurry. The last train had already stopped running. Having no other choice, Juria rented a taxi and got in with Minho. The car raced at full speed along the wide night highway. The leaves on both sides of the road flew into the car's headlights in a vivid green hue. The refreshing night drive, within it, Minho gradually came to his senses and began to realize his position and role this night. Am I not a sleepwalker right now? From a hazy consciousness of whether it was a dream or reality, reality or a dream, lowly returned to reality. My actions are right. However, he had no leisure to criticize his actions for long with a clear mind. When inside a jolting car, a person tends to become intoxicated without reason. That light intoxication and the warm body temperature flowing from Juria's body sitting closely beside him pulled him back into the dream world. Where have I come to? When they reached the inside of the island in a single stride, Minho thought his unconscious actions were absurdly immense. Now I have barely survived. I feel like I've escaped from a tiger's den. Juria, as if inwardly relieved, pulled the hesitant Minho's hand as they got out of the car that had pulled right up to the front door of the inn. It seems a companion is not that necessary, so I shall go back. As the thought of his comrade Juwa suddenly crossed his mind, a piece of awakened conscience squeezed Minho's chest. Seeing a comrade's danger yet avoiding their side, where is there such a cowardly person? Juria stood tall, seemingly mocking him. How can someone who will be a future fighter act without even that much courage? Avoiding your side isn't what's dangerous. Sticking by Juria's side seems more dangerous. Having you right beside me is less suspicious to other eyes and safer than me being alone. All you have to do is be my scarecrow and ornament for a few days. His thin conscience was softly castrated, and Minho was dragged inside. It was the first season of the sea at the inn, so it was fully booked. Only one room on the second floor was vacant. Then please guide us there, Juria instructed the maid and followed behind her. Because her demeanor was so accustomed and bold, Minho instead turned red in the face. Since it's already come this far, Minho resolved to fight it out. Deciding to see which would win between conscience and lust, and to settle the victory and defeat, he chose to dutifully accept the approaching reality exactly as it was. It is a beautiful night. Opening the window, Minho looked out at the night sea. In the sleeping port across the island, lamps floated buoyantly, and from the base of the island, the dark sea spread out broadly and extensively. A cool breeze flowed in, shaking the dense leaves, and swept through his chest. The sea is beautiful, isn't it? Because Juria had come to stand so close behind Minho's back, Juria's warm breath drifted near enough to tickle the nape of his neck. The night sea is better viewed from the dark. If it's dark, can you see the sea? There is elegance in where it is vaguely visible. I'll go turn off the light, so take a look. You should just leave the light as it is. While Minho was speaking, Juria had already gone back and turned off the electric light in the middle of the room. Coming next to Minho and throwing the window wide open, the dimness is even more beautiful, isn't it? Even what is ugly in a bright place looks completely beautiful in the dark. Both the sea and human sins. Saying this, she bared her chest to meet the fresh breeze. Ah, that lighthouse! Discovering the lighthouse, she stretched out her arm like a child and pointed to the twinkling lighthouse in the distance. Beneath the blinking lighthouse, the mysterious sea spread out muddily in a deep color, and on the same sea, a crescent moon slanted shallowly in what was guessed to be the sky. For us who are buffeted by troublesome reality, romanticism like this is probably necessary sometimes, right? Romanticism? To me, this night is agonizing, because the relationship between Juria and me is by no means a relationship that can float and play within romanticism. Can't you even temporarily imagine the relationship between the two of us romantically? As the door suddenly opened from behind, Juria spun around with a pounding heart, like someone who had committed a sin. In that motion, the waist of her one-piece dress skirt, which incidentally got caught on the hook of Minho's suit, ripped right open. Oh my, what do I do? Touching her torn waist, Juria looked up at Minho anew, with a glare that seemed to reproach him as if it were Minho's fault. Seeing that the room's lights were turned off, the maid standing in the doorway hesitated, said, "Excuse me," and quietly closed the door a crack. "Will you not take a bath before you rest?" Minho hastily turned on the light, got a towel, and followed after her out. While Juria went into the family bath, Minho went alone into the spacious men's bath and soaked his body in the hot tidal water. While the blood in his entire body melted and relaxed, thoughts about Juria and various suspicions arose one after another. What on earth is the inside of Juria's mind like? Did what dazzled and tormented his eyes stem from her young, innocent, and uncalculated disposition? Did it come from her brilliant natural disposition? To say that, her words had too much bite and her behavior too much ulterior motive. Then, was it with a deliberate intent to consciously seduce him from the very beginning? But didn't Minho know full well that her love for Juwa was thick, deep, and without a single fraction of a gap? Then, was it a ploy to sound out his depths? Was it with a fake heart to test a comrade's mind? If so, the behavior was far too painstaking. No matter how much danger there was to her safety, to specifically drag out him, who did not even enjoy it, in the middle of this night, was it not too painstaking an action? Then, if it wasn't that, was it merely a momentary prank? A prank out of boredom? Having thought up to that point, Minho returned to the very beginning, rethinking Juria's true intentions and making repeated guesses. During that time, Juria too had been immersed in various thoughts in the private bath. She could not grasp the direction of her deeply divided heart. More than anyone else, she loved Juwa. There was no way Juria would not love him, whom she had chosen at first sight out of visual affection rather than ideological sympathy. That love gradually transformed into something deep, thick, and reliable. However, at the same time, she also did not dislike Juwa's comrade, Minho. She felt a visual attraction. As long as a human body has eyes and a heart, she thought this was by no means a sin. She believed that when shapes reflect in the two eyes, which are the antennas of the senses, having some kind of feeling toward them is at least the freedom of a human heart. Thinking that way, she received not the slightest scolding from her conscience. She thought that following the orders of emotion well might conversely be the very way of being faithful to one's conscience. What ignited these thoughts was Minho's lover, Nam-hee. From the very first moment she met Nam-hee, she felt an inexplicable jealousy. It was almost instinctive, but that jealousy helped guide her actions tonight. Tonight's actions, they were a means to avoid danger to her safety, and at the same time, perhaps a kind of boasting towards Nam-hee, a demonstration. Of course, she had no ultimate calculation or ambition to unfold tonight's actions all the way to a certain end. She did not yet feel toward Minho to the utmost extent. Merely a visual attraction toward him, felt to the same degree as what she felt toward Juhua. This alone was an undeniable fact. A woman's heart spreading out in all directions like pumpkin vines, all equally branches of genuine feeling where one cannot say which branch is true and which is false, At that multi-directional, deeply divided heart, Juria herself could not help but be surprised. Returning to the room after finishing the bath, two sets of bedding were laid out side by side in the middle of the room. The maid had laid them out, naturally assuming they were a married couple. It looks just like the bed of a married couple. Minho, who came in closely behind, uttered inwardly and went toward one side of the bedding. It seems the night is quite late. We should sleep soon. Juria went over to the other set of bedding and said, I can't fall asleep if it's bright. Then I'll turn off the light. Minho's hand reached out and the electric light turned off. In the darkness, the two fumbled to change into their nightclothes and each got into their bedding. Juria carrying an indifferent posture and Minho carrying the resolve to painfully fight it out for one night. Where is the antenna of your heart pointing tonight? Like the endless branches of a vine, Juria's complex feelings and Minho's quiet moral struggle remind us of our own hidden desires and unspoken thoughts. I hope this late-night seaside tale has brought a lingering sense of calm to your evening. Thank you for spending your night with Slow Night Ancient Tales. If you enjoyed tonight's journey, please subscribe and leave a like to support the channel. Wishing you a deep, restful sleep and beautiful dreams. Good night.